Let's get started. Good evening. Welcome to BSides Las Vegas Proving Ground. This talk is Salesforce Data Governance, What Dark Secrets Lurk in Your Instance. Our speaker for this is Pete Thurston. A few announcements before we get started. We want to thank our sponsors, especially our Inner Circle sponsors, Critical Stack and Valley Mail, and stellar sponsors Cylance, Microsoft, and Robinhood. It's their support, along with other sponsors and donors and volunteers, that make BSides possible. These talks are being streamed live, so as a courtesy to our speaker and our audience, please check and make sure your cell phone is set to silent. If you have a question after the talk, just please raise your hand. We'll call on you one at a time and ask our speaker to repeat your question for the YouTube audience. And that's it. Let's get started. Please welcome Pete Thurston.
Last session of the day. Right? Yeah, exactly. We're going to knock this out as fast as possible. We'll do all Q&A at the bar. Promise. But yeah, no, so hi, my name is Pete. Thank you for hanging out until 7 p.m. in Las Vegas. Very impressed. Today we're going to talk about, a lot about Salesforce, but really broadly, we're going to talk about platforms as a service and some of the core kind of things to be concerned about or to keep an eye on as businesses continue to evolve deeper into the PaaS world. Really quick, just so I know who I'm talking to, if you are a Salesforce customer today, can I get one of these? Okay. Me too. Or just a deep gasp will work as well. Or if you're working with any other kind of platform as a service systems, AWS, ServiceNow, things like that. More deep gasps. Cool. Let's figure all that out. So who am I? So my name is Pete. I've worked with Salesforce specifically. We're going to talk a lot about Salesforce today. Keep these things in mind across any other systems you're working with. But I've worked with Salesforce since 2007. I've got a lot of experience starting out as a developer. Before that, I was a database developer on kind of traditional systems. And when I became a Salesforce customer in 2007, I really quickly started to realize that we weren't applying the same security concerns to Salesforce or other cloud platforms that we were to everything else we were doing, right? So as a customer of Salesforce, I started looking around and I said, we need to find somebody who can help us out with that, who can help us figure out how we're going to apply all of our defense in-depth strategies that we have as a very large financial services company at the time to Salesforce. I couldn't find one, so I started one. And so now there's a company called RevCult, and that's my company. And the key point, the reason I bring this up is not necessarily to say, hey, come to RevCult, we're awesome. We are. But it's really just to kind of say, why am I worthy of being in this room talking about this? I've been doing this for a very long time, really focused specifically on security for these emerging platforms as a service out in the cloud. I am married, I've got some kids, I've got a whole lot of guitars. My last time I gave this talk, I was actually very excited. The only question during Q&A was what my favorite solid body electric guitar was. We can have that conversation. I'd be more than happy to have that conversation at the bar. So that's me. That's how I live, that's what I do. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk through, from a platform security perspective, what are the 7 most common things that I see when I go out and I'm getting my hands dirty in client orgs. So we do security risk assessments for Salesforce engagements all the time. And a lot of what you're going to hear today and a lot of what you're going to see today might be considered rudimentary. And I think one of the really key things to keep in mind as we have this conversation today is that security for platforms in the cloud, out in the universe today, is pretty rudimentary. And so keeping in mind that we focus with the basics, we get all those things kind of lined up so that we can take it to the next level. That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So what do I see all the time out in the field when I'm getting, busy in client orgs. We're also going to talk about like, well, where do you start? So when you have that business conversation of how do you address these problems, where do you start and how can you start to move the needle in the right direction? So 7 things. And don't worry, at the end there's like a wrap-up slide. So the first thing is not knowing who can see what in the system. Salesforce specifically has a very robust like security model, right? So you have this foundational security, and then you have the ability to expose information to greater and greater user groups. Well, as companies scale, as things change, as you start to add new roles and responsibilities and new apps into the system, it's very hard to keep your hands on everybody who can gain access to what information. The vast majority of the organizations that I go into, when we look at, hey, what is your security model? Who has access to what information? They normally can't answer that question. And so not knowing who can access what information is the first thing that we see all the time. So that's number 1. Number 2 is moving too fast. So these platforms, Salesforce very specifically, broader, other platforms as well, make it very easy to add new business point solutions as time evolves. So, hey, finance needs a new solution to track all the incoming checks. Or, hey, HR needs to track all the job applications that are coming through. It's very easy to spin up these applications super quick, right? So if you can put anything out there you want to, and you can, enable your business users to start killing it immediately, why wouldn't you, right? Well, it's very easy to move really, really fast. It's also really easy to move too fast and not think about like, okay, well, the second screen of adding a new field to Salesforce is which users should have access to that field. It's very easy to be like, next, and go on, and just kind of get these new information data point storage options into the system. So making sure that you take the time to really focus on what you're doing as you build the application. See it all the time, everybody goes real fast, and they get things built, and everybody's happy until the auditors show up. So this actually happens all the time. Everyone's an admin scenario. You'll get somebody comes up to your admin's desk and says, hey, I got to get this really critical report. It's got to go to the entire C-suite. It's got to be there tomorrow for an investor meeting. It has to have every single record in it. We got to get it today, period. And frankly, the security model is pretty complicated, and it can be hard to restrict what type of information those people really should have. So a lot of times people will say, hey, you know what? I'll make you an admin for today. Go run your report, and then I'll fix it tomorrow. And spoiler alert, tomorrow means never. Thank you. Somebody finished my sentence. We're meant to be. But yeah, I mean, but it does. I mean, it happens all the time. So I go into orgs all the time. I see 80%, 80+% of your users are system administrators. Now, not only do they have access to all your data, they also have access to all of your intellectual property. They can go start changing your code. They can drop a class. They can remove, objects from the system. This is a very, very high-risk thing that, frankly, just literally happens in almost every single org that I go look at. This is my favorite comic that we've created here at RevCult. And it's a quote from an actual customer. This is an actual developer quote. HTTP is 80% of HTTPS. 4 out of 5 ain't bad. This literally happened in a meeting that I had with a client. But one of the things I really want to talk about here from an integrations perspective. So as more and more information moves to the cloud or, the internet, like websites, right? As more and more information moves to the cloud, integrations become critical because you can't move an entire business to one platform overnight, right? But what you can do is you can start to put some core functionality together and then hook into your existing systems. I haven't been in an org, an instance, an org, whatever, in the last couple of years that wasn't integrated to something. And the really key point with integrations is that integrations mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's API point-to-point integrations. There's ETL integrations. There's Susan runs a report at 8:15 on Fridays and saves it off on this FTP server, and then something picks it up on Saturday, right? Like, integrations mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so making sure that you actually understand what's out there is really, really important. Now, if you don't know Salesforce intimately, like at a code level, you do need to be aware, if you're responsible for information security in this platform, that it's really easy to do things like build a custom REST endpoint for your org that is publicly accessible to the internet. So you could hit some Visualforce page and you could just call a get on like every single account in your org, right? That is a problem. Knowing how to look for it is really, really, really important. There are not controls in the core platform to avoid things like that insane situation. You just need to know that it's out there, it's possible, and that you need to have an informed way to look for those things and monitor them on an occurring basis. The other thing that I see all the time with integrations is people replicating the data or duplicating the data out of Salesforce into other systems. So whether that's a backup solution or whatever, and then when it lands in the new home, it's fundamentally either less or way more secure than Salesforce, which might tell you something, right? Like if you're replicating information off to a database and that data point is really critical to be encrypted at rest, maybe that should be up north in the source system, right? Or vice versa. So making sure that as you integrate information, as this information flows throughout your organization, that you're treating the same data points with the same level of security and concern throughout, very important. So, there is this thing in Salesforce, in the setup menu. It says health check, which seems relatively innocuous. Do we have any CISOs in the room? Cool. So when your CISO finds out about this thing, right, they're gonna be like, hey, go run the health check and tell me how secure we are in Salesforce. That's gonna happen. It is literally like a number, and you pull up a screen and it says, hey, we're 70% secure. And you go, yay, we're good. Or, boo, we're not good. There's a lot that the health check can't check, right? So it can be a false sense of security. It can also be a red herring in a lot of cases. There's a couple of really key things about the health check, Salesforce specific. The first thing is, it can only look like to see if settings are like on or off. It can't tell you, has code been written in an insecure fashion? Are you sending incidental callouts? Are you sending your information outside of the system? It can't do those things, but it can check if stuff is like on or off. It's not useless, right? But it's valuable, but it's not the end of the story. The other key is that it is based on whatever Salesforce decided was their best practices for you, for your org. So making sure that you actually configure this thing to be tailor fit to whatever your baseline kind of settings are, very important. So most of these platforms in the cloud, right, Salesforce is a great example of it. They're basically just databases on websites, right? So their whole purpose is to collect and manage information and store it somewhere so that people can interact with that information. You actually really need to be able to enable your users to interact with that information, add new information, change it, delete it, do whatever they got to do. Now the key is if somebody makes a mistake or maliciously tries to extract information from the system, how do you at least know that that's occurring and recover from it if something goes sideways? There's actually a lot of robust tools in the platform that allow you to do things like that, like tracking, just basic stuff like tracking field history, like when people change key data elements, how can you see what the previous value was and restore it? Or being able to leverage, like there's a weekly export service, so you can save off all the data on a weekly basis, and if you needed to go do forensics, you can do it. Most people just don't turn that stuff on. Right? So data loss prevention is a huge one. I mean, the biggest one I see is in the cartoon there, and this is the thing I hear about all the time, where people come and they're like, hey, you know, this key salesperson, the Rainmaker, left last week. We're pretty sure he took the whole book with him. How do we know? That's one element of it, but there's also just like changes to information, and how do you know that people, you know, how do you restore that information if they inadvertently change it? So really key, DLP. All right, so there's this product called Salesforce Shield. It's actually 3 products. It's a blanket product, but the idea is that it allows you to do some advanced security controls for Salesforce, encryption at rest, event monitoring, so you can do things like check when the salesperson exported all the accounts, and field audit trail, so you can kind of have an advanced or an enhanced version of DLP for field history tracking. Most of the people I work with have bought Shield and have never done anything with it. So they're paying for it, and it's remarkably not inexpensive. I'll say it very kindly because I'm a very good Salesforce partner, but it is not a cheap product. And most of the people I know who have bought Shield have never turned it on. So making sure that if you do need to go that route, if you do need to kind of level up your security and do things like encryption at rest, enhanced DLP, event monitoring, if you buy it, please God, use it. So what can you do, right? Where can you start? The very first thing is to know your data. We talk to people all the time who say, hey, don't worry about it, for Salesforce, we just use it for sales, it's fine. And then you find out, hey, it's hooked into your website, and you're collecting from your forms on your website, you're getting all these people randomly typing in, 1,000 characters of text in their case comment, or whatever it might be, right? You start to look at the data, it starts to get really hairy, really fast, but the biggest thing that I tell people is just know what you actually have in the first place. If you go to your Salesforce admin and you say, what do we have in Salesforce? They're gonna be like, don't worry about it, it's just cases, right? But really push them on it. Really figure out what are the data elements that are getting stored inside that system. You probably are applying data classification to other systems in your organization. There is absolutely no reason that Salesforce should not fall under that same purview. So once you know the data and you know how you feel about that information and how you need to protect it, then you can move on to knowing who your users are. Who is actually interacting with that information? This is surprisingly complicated in Salesforce specifically. Because they have such a robust security model that allows you to define a baseline and then expand access at a user by user level, it's actually pretty complicated to get to this level of information, but it doesn't make it any less critical. It's absolutely essential that you understand who the users in your system are and what information that they can interact with. At that point, you can take that data classification, the sensitivity that you've applied to those fields and the people who have access to it, and you can start to make decisions. So the third thing is know what's out there. Know what the landscape is. What are your options? We talked a little bit about Shield earlier, right? So Shield is that platform encryption, event monitoring, field audit trail, but that's not it. That's not the only solution, right? There's other things out there. There's CASBs out there, cloud access security brokers. Anybody here work for a CASB? Cool. Not a huge fan of CASBs. I'm not against them. I don't think that they're worthless, but I think they're part of a toolbox. And they try to basically broker access to data across all your cloud platforms, which means that they can't get into the intricacies of each one. And so that's nobody's fault. It's a different piece of the toolbox. But backup restore solutions, DLP solutions, make sure you look into what's out there. Event monitoring is actually really powerful. It can really watch every single thing that happens in your org from every click that anybody does inside of Salesforce. Out of the box, there's not a lot of intelligence to it. There's not a lot of like anomaly detection or behavioral analysis or any of that stuff, but there is some stuff out there. So know what's available so that you can apply that to what you really need to achieve inside your system. All right, we're getting really close. I read the book. It said I'm supposed to say you're allowed to take photos, so you're allowed to take photos if you want of any of this, including myself. But anyway, this is kind of the takeaway slide, right? So what are the things we talked about? Know who your users are. Make sure that as you build, you're tending to security as you go. Please God, not everybody needs to be an admin. Know what integrations are and keep them tight, please. The health check is definitely not what people think it is. If you bought Shield, use it. Know your data, know your users, know what's possible, know me. I'm here to help. One thing I do want to call out here is on the bottom right. So Salesforce, if you're not a Salesforce user, or if you're not intimately familiar with it, has this whole element, this learning management system called Trailhead. Trailhead's kind of actually really cool and free. I keep that bottom right-hand link up to date as much as I can. It's basically my like security essentials for Salesforce Trailhead. So feel free to check it out. It'll walk you through some of the fundamentals and the basics of security for Salesforce. Email me. I'm pretty sure you could tweet me if I had put my Twitter thingy up there. It's force.pete. So, check it out on YouTube later, I guess, or to remind yourself. But anyway, that's me. Thank you very much for your time. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. We have a few minutes for Q&A. How was your water experience? This is what I got.
I got about twice that.
Oh, you killed it. All right. Yeah, please. So for the internet, have I read or looked at any of the NIST or cybersecurity frameworks, right, for cloud security? Right. So looked at and read, of course. Yeah. A lot of people aren't getting to the point where they're still ready to apply the newer, like the standards, right? So what a lot of people are still focused on is some of the legacy, like ISO 27K type stuff, and they're having a really hard time translating that to the cloud. Is that where your question's kind of coming from? So yeah, a lot of people are still kind of hung up on the legacy ISO stuff, the 27K one specifically. And I'm really excited about the new frameworks, and I can't wait till somebody adopts it so we can really start to push it forward. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
So do you perform penetration testing or assessment? Like, do you get candidates?
That's a great question. Yeah, so again, for the people on the recording, the question was, do we do pen testing or do we require admin access to perform assessments on instances? Yeah. So there's actually two questions. So the first one has a kind of a cool answer, actually. Salesforce has, in the last 18 to 24 months-ish, rolled out a complimentary pen testing service. So you can actually work with Salesforce directly to do pen testing against your instance. I'm sorry? No, they do outside pen testing. So you can do the checkmark scan, yes, but also they do like legit pen testing now that will actually do endpoint inspection and all kinds of stuff, right? So it will fire against your instance inside your container, inside the org. The great part about that is I believe they, and don't quote me on this, internet, but I believe they do it complimentary every 6 months. And so when we do risk assessments, we will kind of basically accommodate that. So we'll work with Salesforce and with the client to do that. And then what we do is we kind of go to the next level. So again, that's really just pen testing, right? So that's just invasion testing. It's very, very useful. It's very, very powerful. I don't mean to diminish it. But it can't kind of check for data egress and things like that. So what we do is we kind of go to the next level. We do actual code and configuration assessments. So to your question of like, do we require admin access? Yes, we do. Obviously, we'll sign any paperwork we need to do, but when we do it, yeah. So we have some automated tooling that can check things that automated tooling can test. And then we have a lot of human checks around things like, you can do kind of crazy stuff like put call out endpoints into like custom settings, and we need to actually go look at the custom settings to see what those call out endpoints are, things like that. So we go pretty deep on those levels. So we'll do code config and then facilitate pen testing and some other stuff. Yeah, no problem. And then when we do, the other thing we make available is we actually have some products that are available for Salesforce that do like the who sees what, the access management, things like that. And we can basically reverse engineer the whole security model to figure out who can access what information. Any other questions? I'm with you, man. All right, to the bar. Thank you, guys.